Hello and welcome in, anyone who may be out there. Hope you're all having fun. Today I'm going to be starting off a new tutorial series on VRChat world and avatar creation. In general, it's primarily going to be focusing on creating large, advanced game-style worlds for VRChat. Trying to focus, get more into the nitty-gritty of some of the more advanced features and like creating inventory systems, better player tracking, and, hard equip systems, and like doing things like hijacking the desktop camera. And so today, as with everyone out there, I'm going to be covering everything from the ground up. So today is simply how to set up a world and maybe a few considerations and just kind of how to set up general systems and such. So without further ado, in order to create a new project for VRChat, you're going to want Unity. I'm using Unity Hub because I use multiple versions of Unity, and mainly because I use the latest one for normal game development, the 2018.4.16 F1. That's what you're going to be using if you're trying to make a VRM avatar like the one I'm using right here. But for VRChat specifically, we're using the 2018.4.20 F1 release. This is a long-term support version from 2018 and is what you absolutely must be using if you're going to make anything for VRChat, at least for now. Soon enough, it's going to be going to the 2019 long-term support version, but we're not there yet. So we're going to go to the 2018.4.20 F1 version. You're going to be making a new project. In general, you're always going to want just a regular 3D scene, nothing super special. You can name it whatever you want. For me, I'm going to call it tutorial world. And I'm not too sure yet. I think I'm probably going to start working with a single world and kind of just build upon it. So we'll make this the main world, and we're going to go into make a new folder for that. New folder, tutorial world, spelled wrong, that's fine. And you're going to create a new project. Now, one important thing, something that tends to not get stated enough, that I think everybody could probably make good use of, is the understanding that creating a world in VRChat or creating an avatar in VRChat is simply creating a Unity scene. It's making a normal level. If you're making a world, it's just the same thing pretty much, with a few caveats, but it's basically the same thing as creating a normal Unity world. So with that, if you're ever stuck or confused, or you don't know how to do something in VRChat, or you're trying to make a feature for VRChat, understand you're essentially creating a Unity world. And so a lot of the tutorials for normal Unity projects will also work for VRChat creation. So next big thing is, once you have your basic world setup going, the next real thing is you're going to need the SDK. Again, I'm basically running over the same basic instructions that pretty much everyone talks about. And you're going to want to, basically you could just Google it or something along those lines, but you just want to search VRChat SDK. You're probably going to end up in this page, and from this page, you can find the other page directly, but this always seems to be the first thing that pops up on Google. So this is where I'll start you, but you're going to want to go to this VRChat SDK, choosing your SDK selection option. You're just going to click in there, and then all of the SDKs are available on our website. So once you get into that link, you're going to run into this page right here, and you're going to log in. You're going to have your character and everything set up all nice and pretty alike. But the big things you're going to be looking for is you're going to be wanting, you don't need the client, don't really need Unity, but obviously you need that specific version. The big things you're going to be looking for is SDK3 Worlds or SDK3 Avatars. SDK2 I highly do not suggest touching. There's really no point at this point, and every tutorial I'm going to be talking about is going to be involving the SDK 3 specifically, because everything I'm going to be doing is Udon Sharp, and it's programming, and it is how you make the more complex worlds. I'm not going to be touching regular Udon graph style construction. Personally, I think it's a terrible system. I think it's slow, and it's actually really, really hard to do anything complex. It works decently if you're just trying to turn things on and off, but if you're actually trying to make a game or make an inventory system or more complex events, you really need to know some programming. But I'm going to talk you through everything along the way, and so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. So anyway, you're going to download whichever one of these you're going to be wanting, either the worlds or the avatars. That's also how you're going to have the latest release of everything. Now the other thing you're going to want is Udon Sharp. If you ever go in and Google Udon Sharp, you're going to run into this GitHub Merlin VR Udon Sharp. That's exactly what you're going to be wanting. And this is basically what's going to allow us to do C# code in VRChat, or for creating the worlds. It's essentially, I mean, it basically is Udon, and you're just going to download the zip and you'll get the file there. When all that's said and done, I save them and have them in an SDK folder. I've got a few extra things in here, but don't worry too much about that. Biggest things you're going to want is these 3 items. Those are your SDKs and the Udon Sharp Unity package. So first thing you're going to want to do when you're starting off any kind of project is, I'm going to be starting off with a world. Avatars are pretty much the same process without the Udon Sharp, but as I said, I'm primarily going to be focusing on worlds, so I'm going to be setting things up in a world aspect. To install or start things off as a VRChat project, you're going to want to drag the SDK straight down here into your assets section. Nothing too crazy. It's going to take a little bit. So one of the things that mainly going on because I'm wanting to use Udon Sharp is, one, probably the biggest advantage is because Udon Sharp and normal Unity programming with C# is almost the same thing. All of the Unity programming tutorials and stuff carry over to this, almost all of it. The biggest downside though is what Udon actually is. Udon is the way that the VRChat developers wanted to give players and creators access to create the full extent of a world and things like that for VRChat that you could already do in Unity. But they didn't have Udon until now, because ultimately if you give people access to everything in Unity, well then they could just use it to essentially hack VRChat. They'd take control over it, they could overwrite player menus, you know, control where players go. Like, I mean, it's full-blown game development at that point. You know, you can do anything. And obviously they don't want people to be doing that. So they created Udon. And Udon is basically the exact same thing as normal Unity development, but with a lot of restrictions on some of the more behind the scenes programming and control. So as far as doing things like moving objects and tracking objects and saving and loading and synchronizing variables and stuff, a lot of that carries over between normal Unity development and VRChat. Biggest things you won't have access to is things like writing files to the desktop, reading broader network information, and most specifically, actually controlling the player. In other words, actually manipulating how another player is controlled in the world. You know, VRChat doesn't want a world creator to be able to disable that player's menu or, you know, teleport them, or I mean, yes, you can teleport through normal teleportation means, but as far as like totally hijacking a player model or something like that, that's something they absolutely don't want to have access to, so you won't be able to do that with Udon, and in my case, Udon Sharp. What Udon Sharp is is it's kind of a translator between the Noodle graphical interface that Udon is and basically the C# programming that normal Unity development is. So what you get to do is you get to program like normal Unity development with the restrictions of Udon, and then all of that works together in VRChat. So now it looks like we have everything imported and up and running. We've got VRChat Udon Alpha SDK. This little pop-up is going to show up. It's going to tell you a little bit about Udon, all that kind of stuff. You don't really need to worry about that. But you're also going to get this new tab up here. It's going to be the VRChat SDK. And you go to your show control panel. This can pop up on another screen. I'm going to drag it up. You're going to log in. Let me log in real quick. All right, once you've logged in, you're going to have this little display right here. A VRC scene descriptor or VRC avatar descriptor is required to build a VRChat SDK content. Obviously, you're trying to make a world, and this thing is going to be your main controller for testing and editing and understanding the world as it is translated or given to VRChat. If you want to upload the world or anything like that, you're going to go through this VRChat SDK control panel. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'll leave this here. Okay, we'll stay on top. That's nice. So first thing I'm going to actually do once I have this kind of set up, we're all set up. We have the SDK running. Now we're going to bring in the second asset, and that is going to be our Udon Sharp. And we're going to install that just the same way. Now, an important thing to understand is make sure that the version of the world and the version of the Udon Sharp that you're using do match up and are cooperating with each other. Best option would just be to, when you download one, download the other and keep them together. Okay, that pop-up's going to show up again. And now we have Udon Sharp. The big thing to understand is all of this all these folders right here, your Gizmo scenes, all that kind of stuff, VRChat SDK, all of that is just the behind the scenes. That is the main assets of the world. To make a world, up here it says a VRChat scene descriptor or avatar descriptor is required. The SDK doesn't necessarily know if you're making an avatar or a scene right now. But we did find and install the world SDK. So, easiest way to add normal player spawning and control is to actually find the prefab of VRChat for making a scene. And we're actually going to do one thing first. We're going to make a 3D object. We're going to make a plane. Now the difference between a plane and a quad is a plane is bigger. And that's really the only thing, as far as I know. They're both big flat objects. A quad is a 1x1, and this looks like it's a 10x10. That's really the only difference. And the place where that's going to really show up is going to be in this transform. This is a 10x10 square, and it's scaled at 1:1:1. So it's normal full size in each direction. But a quad would say 1:1:1 and only be a 1x1 square. Anyway, this is a nice little flat platform for players to actually hop on. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a folder. Now, it's totally not necessary. At the end of the day, the assets folder, you can pretty much put things in any organizational order that you like. I like to keep everything that I'm doing separate from the SDKs, personally. So I'm just going to make a folder. I'm going to call it world. I'm going to click in there. And then to get rid of this giant flat white area, it's a little on the bright side. So we're just going to create another thing. And understand, when you right click in this area and you go to create, you can see everything that you can basically make as a base object. Now, importing your own 3D models is going to come a little bit differently a little bit later. But, you know, if you're trying to make a new Udon Sharp script, which is basically creating a behavior, which is the instructions, which is the programming of an object, and how it interacts with the world and stuff like that, you can make that right here. C# script, you basically aren't going to be messing with. Udon Sharp scripts and C Sharp scripts are essentially the same thing, but not. Understand? But yeah, this is where you can basically create all basic things. And in this case, I'm going to be creating a material. And what a material is, I mean, it really is a material. It's the thing itself. It's the way it's presented in the world. It's the combination of the shader and the pictures that you put together to put on an object in the world. I'm going to call this one the floor. And see how we've got these squares right here, albedo and metallic. These are where you can actually put the pictures if you do have UV mapping to your object or something like that. If you had the pictures, you know, you would basically just drag them in from a folder and put them in here. And then you could drag those pictures up into these little squares and it would make it a picture instead of just this solid color. In this case, we're just doing a basic setup. I just want to gray it up a little bit. And so we're going to make it a little gray. And I'm going to make it full metal. And I'm going to take the smoothness all the way down. Now, if you max it out, it's going to be almost like a mirror, highly reflective object. And if you bring it all the way down, it's going to be very matte. And then once you have that, or once you have your material how you want it, you can just drag it onto the object that you're trying to do. If it's like an avatar or something, and you have multiple material maps to the character, you'll probably have one for the eyes, one for the body, and then one for like the hair or something. You'll just drag it onto those individual parts of the character. But now we have a nice plain floor that's not too hard on the eyes. Hopefully it's still decently visible. Actually, I think I'm gonna make it a little bit lighter. You know what, let's blue it up just for some fun. Okay. So there we go. We have a nice big flat plane to create our empty, well, our basic world in. Now, we're going to go into our assets and remember over here with the VRChat SDK, a VRC scene descriptor is required. Now that is very easy to add. There's two ways you could actually do it. And one way I've actually never done, but you totally can and should for larger complex worlds where you're going to need it. You can create an empty object. And what a VRC scene descriptor is a component. So if you type in, or you go over and you select your object, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Go over here, we created a game, or created an empty, which an empty is just literally an empty object. It is a position in space, and it's recognized as an object. And we can say this, call it a descriptor. It doesn't really matter. The name is more for your use. Now, manipulating the name is a way I use to control a card system or something like that, is by checking names of objects to understand what their current state of being is. But in general, the name can be anything you want. So you could go into add component now, and components are just the things that you put into an object. An object is a collection of things that go together to make a character or make an object. So if you had a cup, you know, obviously you would have an empty, you would have the object that is the cup. Then inside that you would have the mesh, the shape, the geometry that makes up that cup. Then you would have the material or the shader of that cup. You know, it's the picture, it's the look of the cup. And then if it's a physics object, you could go in here and go to physics, and you can give it a collider, which lets it interact with things in physics. Or you could make a rigid body, which makes it fall and bounce and do all that kind of stuff. You're adding components to objects to make them more interesting or more complex. They're the elements that make up that object. In this case, you can say VRC and I'm done. Oh, there we are. Scene descriptor. I thought for a second I missed it. So we have this scene descriptor. Now, the moment you hit that, you get some errors and fun stuff to pop up. And this is totally normal. Because what you did when we started, we made an empty blank Unity world. And it's not actually set up for VRChat, but the SDK can set it up automatically. In VRChat, you know how when you're going around and you're clicking on objects and things, you see that blue outline or the laser and stuff like that? Well, that's on the UI layer. And the player is on one layer to themselves, but everybody else actually sees a different version of the player. If you've seen players, or if you've seen yourself in a third person before, you've probably seen some version of yourself with your head all crushed in, and basically so your neck is like tied off at a knot and your head's not really there. Well, that's the layer of your own self that you see, because your camera has to be there. And obviously you don't want to see your own head if your camera's there. But the other players obviously want to see your head. So all of those things are shown on different layers. And so one of the first errors that's going to pop up is the layers issue. And it's really easy. Just let it set it up. Do it. And then over here under layers, you're going to see all the different layers of VRChat. It's automatically set them up. It's put everything in the right places. You don't need to worry about it. Pretty much click, fix it, and you can forget it. Next thing is going to be using layers for collision, and do it again. Congratulations, you've got that set up. Now the last thing is automatic light map generation. You just want to disable it and you can just click auto fix. It's going to bring up the rendering information, and all it's doing is unchecking this auto generate button. Now every world you make, you're going to want to generate the lighting probably once. If this window is closed, you're going to want to go to window, rendering, light settings. And that's going to get you right back to where we're at here. And this is where you're going to set up your lights and your basically the detail of the lights and everything. And we're going to generate lighting real quick, because why not? We don't really have anything super special going on. It happens really quick. It helps things render realistically or be well lit. Now we have everything completely set up. We could totally test out this world. The biggest downsides are with this scene descriptor. We now know that we have a world and everything, but we don't necessarily know things like spawn locations or anything like that. There is this spawns array right here with the size, and if we say 1, it's going to have a transform. And this is how many spawn points you want in the world. If you want 10, congratulations, you have 10 spawn points in the world. And these elements, these none transform, that means there's no transform selected. And the transform is this thing up here. It's purely the coordinate data. So when you go over and you create an empty object, all it is a transform. It's just a position, scale, and rotation in space. And so you could, because I have this one right here, I could call this spawn 1 or whatever. And I could go over to my scene descriptor, and since I only have one spawn location, I could size 1, and I can take this spawn 1. Ooh. Now here's something, quick tip. If you have two things and you want to go from one thing and you want to select another, but you want to drag that into this side, you can actually click this tiny little lock up in the top corner. And that locks this screen right here, so you can select the other thing and not mess anything up. But you can take the spawn 1 and you can just drag it into that transform. What it's doing there is when you're dragging an object into a transform or into any slot, that, you know, if it's a game object or if it's wanting a rigid body or any kind of physics object, and you drag an object onto there, all it's going to do is look inside that object to find that thing in that object. So when I dragged this object into the transform slot, it looked into this object and found its transform and put that transform in that slot. That's what it did there. So this would essentially be everything you would need to create a world. Now, we're going to do something else, which is more the way I've always done it, and is a little more straightforward and has a little bit less margin for error. And that is, the SDK itself actually has a scene descriptor object with spawn point and everything set up already. It's a prefab. And what a prefab is in Unity or VRChat or anything like that, a prefab is just a collection of objects that is saved as its own thing. Okay, so remember how like an object is a collection of elements or components? You know, right here with the plane, we have the floor shader or the material. We have the collider, which is the physics object that makes it so you can stand on it. We have the mesh renderer, which is the visual, the fact that it's this big flat plane. We have the mesh itself, the plane. And then we have its transform, which is its position. So what we can do is we can actually go in here and... Okay. So here we are. I was messed up. I was confused and a little bit dumb. When you want to find it, there's a prefab object inside here. It's called the world, or you can just search world and you'll see it right here. VRC world is one, and you can see that it's already a put together object. Okay? Or it's a prefab asset up here. But it's basically just an object. And it's an object that already has the scene descriptor. It already has a spawn location, and then it already has this Udon graph on it. And if I hit open Udon graph, you can see kind of the, this is the thing that I'm not going to be touching, but you can generally understand what they're doing right here. And let's see if we can figure out what this is doing real quick. I haven't really inspected this before. We're going to go from the start. Local player, basically if there is a local player. And then it's going to do all these things in order. Oh, and all this is doing is setting up your jump height, your walking speed, your running speed, and your strafing speed. Basically how fast you move around in the world. And that's all that does. Okay? It's setting some default player controller variables. Now, nothing we need to really worry about, but what we're going to do is we're going to take this VRC world and we're going to drag that into the world. And you can see we've got two things now. We've got this plane, it's at 0, 0, 0. And we've got the VRC world, and we're going to notice the position's a little wonky. So we're going to put this one at 0, 0, 0, 2. But we might want to move it up just a little bit, but it's not really going to matter. But it is nice to force an understanding that the world, which is also the spawn location, is above the plane. So I'm going to make that 0.001. So just oh so slightly above. And understand that in Unity and VRChat, X is left and right. Or actually, I believe right and left. Y is up and down, and Z is forward and back. Okay. So with that, we've moved it up just a tiny bit above the plane, but it's not super essential. Just understand that if you run into an issue, that might happen. So lastly, we have everything we need to make this a world. We have everything set up. This is an unpublished world, no big deal. We're going to hit build and test. And everything should work pretty well. All right, And here we are inside of the VRChat world that we created. Here's me and my avatar and my glitchy eyeball shadows. I think my body is not set to cast shadows, apparently. Little bit of an issue. I'm still very new to making avatars when I made this one. So he still got some issues, but I never really got around to fixing it. Anyway, here we are. We're in a nice, fun, empty world. And don't worry too much if you do happen to jump off the side. One thing to note, there is no bottom side to a plane. Everything renders on one side, and if you fall off the edge of the world, it'll just throw you back to respawn. Inside here, you can still access all your normal expressions and things, and you have your UI and everything too. So, with that, we're going to close out of VRChat. And I do believe that is going to conclude this first little tutorial. Now, next time we're going to get into a little bit of Udon Sharp and understanding how it interacts with everything, how to set it up, how to do a little bit of programming, and how things interact with a little bit of C# tutorial. Anyway, thank you for watching. I know this is kind of the very bare bones basics that you can find pretty much anywhere, but I figured I should probably do it myself if I'm going to be going more and more advanced into everything, so you know where I'm coming from. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and stay tuned for more. Bye.